Sometimes I wonder if everything would have been different if my dad hadn't died that spring morning. I was only 6 years old then, but I remember that day as if it happened just yesterday. I recall the way Dad used to make pancakes every Sunday, a special tradition that filled our small kitchen with warmth and laughter. He would carefully shape each pancake into funny faces that never failed to make me giggle. Mom, meanwhile, was busy setting the table, softly humming a tune that now feels like a distant memory. I can still hear Dad calling out, "Lily, princess, come help your old man flip these masterpieces," as he waved his spatula like a magic wand. Without a second thought, I jumped off the couch, leaving behind my favorite stuffed bunny, and ran to the kitchen, eager to share in the magic of that morning. But that beautiful moment changed in an instant. In the midst of our joyful routine, the spatula clattered to the floor. I watched in horror as Dad clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. Everything after that became a blur. The piercing sound of ambulance sirens, the endless white corridors of the hospital, and Mom's heart-wrenching cries echoing in every sterile hallway. Just like that, my father was gone, and the home I once knew became a vast, empty space filled with silence and loss. Mom's grief did not last long, at least not in the way one might expect. In her own quiet manner, she began to rebuild her life. Not long after Dad's death, she met a man named Richard at a community support group for widowed parents. Richard was tall, with kind eyes and a gentle smile that reminded me, in a small way, of Dad. Within a year, they were married, and he moved into our home. I struggled to adjust to having a new father figure, someone who was kind yet distinctly different from the dad I had lost. My life was already turned upside down by the sudden loss of my father, and now I had to learn to live with a man who was, in many ways, a stranger. My world shifted further when Mom dropped another bombshell. She was pregnant. I remember her, face glowing with excitement as she broke the news. I was going to be a big sister. I was 8 when my little brother Tommy was born. In that moment, everything changed. Mom quit her job as an elementary school teacher, insisting that Tommy needs me. She repeated it over and over whenever anyone questioned her decision. I longed to ask if my early years hadn't been crucial too, if I too deserved some of that nurturing care. But the words stuck in my throat, and I watched helplessly as Mom's world gradually shrank until it revolved entirely around Tommy. As Tommy grew from a helpless baby into a small, curious child, I became painfully aware of how my needs were increasingly neglected. I remember countless mornings when Mom would forget to pack my lunch for school, only to act surprised when I mentioned that I was hungry at dinner. "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie," she would say distractedly, already turning back to Tommy. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It soon became our new normal. Richard noticed too. One evening, as I sat alone at the dinner table doing my homework, I caught him watching Mom with a worried frown on his face as she fussed over Tommy, completely ignoring my presence. That night, Richard sat beside me and said in a quiet voice, "You know, Lily, sometimes people get so caught up in one thing that they forget to see what else might be missing." I listened, trying to soak in every word, though the mixture of emotions inside me was overwhelming. It was as if Richard's words were trying to break through the heavy barrier of neglect that had slowly encased my world. In his gentle tone, he offered a small measure of comfort, a reminder that I was not entirely alone. But as Tommy grew older, the tension in our household became impossible to ignore. Richard tried repeatedly to talk to Mom about her growing obsession with Tommy, but every conversation ended with Mom becoming defensive and angry. I remember one particular evening during dinner when Richard broached the subject. Tommy, who was about 5 at the time, sat at the table pushing his food around on his plate, while Mom hovered over him, trying to convince him to eat just one more bite. "Sarah," Richard said, putting down his fork, "we need to talk about this. You can't keep hovering over him like this. He needs to learn to do things on his own." Mom's face immediately hardened. "What are you trying to say? That I'm a bad mother? That's not what I meant, and you know it," she snapped back. "You have 2 kids here, not 1, and a husband too, by the way." I pretended to be absorbed in my mashed potatoes, but every word they exchanged cut deep into me. Tommy needed me too, though Mom always insisted otherwise. I would murmur under my breath that she was too young herself to require such constant care, but my words vanished into the clamor of adult disputes. The situation escalated when Richard suggested enrolling Tommy in Little League Baseball. I was supposedly doing my homework on the stairs when I heard them arguing in the kitchen. Absolutely not, Mom's voice rang out, shrill and determined. Do you know how dangerous baseball can be? He could get hit by the ball, twist his ankle, or worse. Richard, ever pragmatic, countered, For God's sake, Sarah, he needs to experience life. You can't protect him from everything. But Mom wouldn't budge. Instead, she enrolled Tommy in art classes at the community center, where I still remember Tommy's sullen face as he dragged his brush across paper in a half-hearted attempt at creativity. While other children engaged and learned, Tommy quit after 3 sessions, and Mom blamed the teacher for not understanding her son's supposed creative spirit. In the midst of all this chaos, Richard began spending more time with me. Perhaps it was his way of balancing out Mom's one-sided attention, or maybe he simply recognized that I needed someone who cared. He started taking me to my karate classes 3 times a week, always sitting in the audience and cheering louder than any other parent when I earned a new belt. Under his attentive guidance, I began to flourish. But while I was finding a sense of self-worth in my achievements, Tommy was becoming increasingly difficult. His room was a constant mess, toys and clothes scattered everywhere, and Mom would look at me with that dreaded expression and say, Lily, be a dear and clean up Tommy's room. It was rarely a request and more of an order. One day, Richard finally intervened, declaring, Sarah, she's not his maid. He needs to learn to clean up after himself. It was then that Mom burst into tears, pulling out her ultimate weapon, a declaration that no one in our family could ever ignore. You love me more than your own son. How can you treat Tommy this way? I watched as Richard's face fell, the fight leaving his eyes. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender and said quietly, Fine, have it your way. After that, he stopped arguing with Mom about Tommy, but the look in his eyes told me that he had not given up on me, even if he had given up on fighting for Tommy. High school graduation day arrived, and it was bittersweet. As I stood in my cap and gown scanning the crowd, I spotted Richard beaming proudly. Mom was there too, though she was more focused on her phone than the celebration, likely texting Tommy's babysitter or arranging another appointment. Later, that evening, Richard called me into his study. With a serious tone, he explained, I've been saving up, as he pulled out a folder full of college brochures. You can go wherever you want, Lily. The sky is the limit. Before I could respond, Mom burst in, exclaiming, You can't be serious. Money should be saved for Tommy's future. He's going to need it more. Richard's face hardened into an expression that had become all too familiar during these confrontations. This is non-negotiable, Sarah. I've already made my decision. Despite the tension, I ended up choosing Marshall University in West Virginia, a place far enough away to start fresh, yet close enough so that I could visit occasionally. When Richard helped me move into my dorm, Mom couldn't come because Tommy had severe anxiety about her leaving. For the first time in my life, college offered a sense of freedom, a break from being the less favored child, shadowed by all the whoa attention that Tommy received. I called home weekly, but most of my conversations were with Richard rather than Mom. She was always too busy with Tommy, juggling his ever-growing needs and crises. On one of our calls, Richard's voice sounded tired as he explained, Your brother's going through a difficult phase. He's hanging out with kids from the wrong side of the tracks. I tried getting him involved in after-school programs, but your mother, she said I was being too hard on him. I interrupted. Exactly. Remembering how Mom had once called me a tyrant for suggesting Tommy might need more structure. Richard sighed. I keep trying, Lily. God knows I keep trying. Although his attempts to help Tommy continued, they often fell on deaf ears. Meanwhile, my visits home became less frequent as Tommy's behavior worsened. Whenever I did visit, he barely acknowledged me, locked in his room with his video games, his eyes fixed on various screens that seemed to hold him captive in his own world. After graduation, I landed a job at a well-known consulting firm in West Virginia and began building my career. I watched from afar as Tommy drifted further into isolation, his life seemingly defined by virtual achievements and fleeting moments of rebellion. On one rare visit home, I mustered the courage to knock on Tommy's door. "Tommy, want to grab lunch? My treat," I suggested. All I received in response was the sound of gunfire from the game he was playing and a curt remark from Mom in the hallway. "He's not feeling social today. He's very stressed." The contrast between our lives was stark. While I pursued my career goals, Tommy was content to lose himself in video games, all the while being cushioned by Mom's endless excuses. Richard's disappointed face said it all. He had largely given up trying to intervene. By the age of 27, I had finally saved enough money for a down payment on my own place. It wasn't huge, just a modest one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. The day I received the keys, I couldn't stop smiling. All those years of saving, of packing brown bag lunches and saying no to expensive designer clothes, had finally paid off. Over the phone that day, I excitedly told Richard, "You all have to come see it. I'm having a housewarming party next Saturday. I'll cook dinner. Richard, I'm even making your favorite lasagna. You wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo, would you?" His warm reply was interrupted by Mom's voice on the other line. "Oh, honey, I don't think we can make it. Tommy has plans that day." I couldn't hide the skepticism in my voice. "Plans? What kind of plans?" I asked. Mom replied, "Vaguely, very important ones." And in the background, I could hear Tommy's video game blaring. That day, only Richard showed up. He brought a potted plant and a bottle of wine, saying, "Your mother sends her love." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Over dinner, Richard filled me in on what was really happening at home. Tommy, now 20 years old, hadn't bothered with college. Instead, he spent his days either gaming or hanging out with a group of drinking buddies. Richard had even tried to help him by offering a position at his construction company as a starting point. "Everyone needs to start somewhere," Richard had explained as he twirled pasta on his fork during our conversation. But Mom, in her relentless defense, had countered that Tommy was too intelligent for manual labor, that he was too smart to work, and was perfectly content to mooch off her support. I could only watch as Richard's sad smile told me that, despite his continuous efforts, nothing seemed to change. 2 years later, my life was suddenly upended once again. I received a call that would change everything. Richard had collapsed at work from a massive heart attack, just like Dad had. By the time I arrived at the hospital, it was too late. Richard was gone. His funeral was surreal. Mom put on a dramatic show, sobbing loudly and declaring to anyone who would listen what a wonderful husband Richard had been. "We were so happy," she wailed. "How will we manage without him?" I watched her performance with a mix of disgust and pity. I knew that her tears were not entirely for Richard. They were for herself, a desperate attempt to mask her own insecurity. I saw the wheels turning behind her grief-stricken facade. Without Richard's income, how would she manage to maintain Tommy's lifestyle? Tommy, on the other hand, didn't even bother to dress appropriately for the funeral. He showed up in wrinkled khakis and a worn-out polo shirt, spending most of the service staring at his phone. Meanwhile, Mom made excuses for him, saying he was simply processing his grief in his own way. Standing at Richard's grave, I couldn't help but think about how history was repeating itself. Another father figure lost to a heart attack. Another funeral that marked a turning point in our family. For the first time, I saw clearly that Mom's tears were more about protecting her own interests than about genuine sorrow. A year after Richard's death, I had mostly lost touch with both Mom and Tommy. What little information I received came from occasional calls from Aunt Linda. "They're getting by on Richard's savings," she would say. I learned that Mom had sold Richard's old Chevrolet the previous month, and that the tools from his workshop were already gone. I tried not to care. Truly I did. But when Mom's number flashed on my phone one Tuesday evening, my heart skipped a beat. Her voice, when I answered, sounded smaller and more fragile than I remembered. "Lily, I need you to come home, please," she pleaded. Something in her tone made me book a flight for the very next day. When I pulled up to our old house, I barely recognized it. The once pristine home that Richard had so meticulously maintained was now overgrown with weeds. The paint was peeling from the window frames, and one of the shutters hung crookedly. It wasn't just the house that had aged poorly. Mom herself had changed. The vibrant woman I remembered was now replaced by someone who looked 20 years older than her actual age. Deep wrinkles lined her face, and her hair, once perfectly colored and styled, now showed stark gray roots. "Come in," she said, leading me into the living room. The house smelled musty, and dishes were piled high in the sink. A thin layer of dust covered every surface, a sad testament to the neglect that had crept into our lives. I could no longer ignore the changes. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, settling onto the worn couch as a small spring dug into my thigh, a remnant of better days when Richard would fix everything immediately. Without hesitation, Mom broke down. "We're running out of money, Lily. My pension barely covers the utilities, and our savings, they're almost gone." She twisted her hands in her lap, her voice trembling between embarrassment and defeat. "What about Tommy? Is he helping with the expenses?" I pressed. Mom's face did a complicated dance between defensiveness and sorrow as she explained, "He's looking for work. It's not his fault. Employers just don't understand him." She went on to detail, in a flurry of excuses, that Tommy's inability to start at 8 a.m. or perform manual labor was a reflection of his sensitive nature. I felt my jaw tighten as her words tumbled out, each one a reminder of the deep-seated problems that had long festered in our family. Before I left that day, Mom's tone shifted abruptly. "Lily, we need your help. We won't survive without it. I hate to ask, but you're doing so well in your career. How much do you need?" she asked hesitantly. My heart sank as she revealed that she required $1,500 per month, a significant chunk of my hard-earned salary. I found myself nodding in resignation, even as my mind rebelled at the thought of supporting a family that had long taken me for granted. "Where's Tommy now?" I asked, preparing to leave. "He's at a job interview." Mom brightened for a moment, adding that it was for a very promising position with a tech company. Through the window, I could see Tommy's bedroom light on and the familiar flicker of his computer screen, a small sign that perhaps some things had not changed. True to my word, I set up an automatic transfer of $1,500 to Mom's account every month. Each time I saw that deduction from my bank balance, I told myself that I was doing the right thing, even if it meant postponing my own dreams of a bigger apartment or a new car. I began visiting home more frequently, though every visit felt like stepping into a time capsule. Tommy was always there, either glued to his computer screen or sprawled on the couch with a beer in hand. "How's the job search going?" I would ask, only to be met with a curt, "Mind your own business," or a dismissive grunt as he turned up the volume on his game. During the holidays, I couldn't stand the state of the living room. The wallpaper was peeling. There was a water stain on the ceiling that would have driven Richard crazy, and the remnants of countless takeout meals were scattered about. Determined to restore some order, I used my Christmas bonus to hire contractors to fix up the house. In February, when Mom sprained her ankle, I called to check on her. "Oh, it's not so bad," she insisted, though I could hear the pain in her voice. Meanwhile, Tommy was reportedly busy with online interviews. I even hired a home health aide for Mom, using the money I had been saving for a vacation to cover her wages for the next 3 weeks. Then came the day I walked into the house and found a stranger sprawled across our sofa. She looked as though she had stepped out of a reality TV show, fake nails that could double as weapons, heavy makeup, and clothes that left little to the imagination. She was scrolling through her phone, surrounded by empty chip bags and soda cans. "Who are you?" I asked, though a sinking feeling in my gut told me I already knew the answer. Tommy emerged from his room, announcing casually, "This is Candy, my fiancée. She lives here now." Candy didn't even look up from her phone. She simply popped her gum loudly. I watched in disbelief as she reached into the grocery bag I had just brought and helped herself to the premium cookies I had bought for Mom. "Nice to meet you too," I muttered under my breath. Later that evening, I called Mom to get her take on the situation. "Oh, Lily," she said, sounding more animated than I had heard her in months. Isn't it wonderful? Tommy's finally settling down. Candy's been such a good influence on him. He hasn't gone out drinking with those awful friends in weeks. That's because she's drinking all my imported beer at home, I thought to myself, remembering the empty bottles I had spotted in the recycling bin. But I held my tongue as Mom continued excitedly about Candy's cousin who supposedly knew someone at a tech startup. A big break for Tommy, she insisted. I made non-committal noises, my mind drifting to the many big breaks Tommy had mentioned over the years. Yet Mom was so happy in her bubble of perpetual hope that I couldn't bring myself to burst it. My next visit home started like any other. I juggled grocery bags as I pushed open the front door, only to stop dead in my tracks. The house looked as though a tornado had torn through it. Dirty dishes piled high in the sink, takeout containers, scattered across every surface, clothes strewn about the living room floor, and Candy carelessly sprawled on the couch. Candy sat there, perfectly manicured nails tapping away at her phone screen. She didn't even look up as I set down the groceries. "You know," I said sharply, "you live here and eat food that I pay for. The least you could do is wash a dish or two." Slowly she looked up, a smirk playing across her heavily glossed lips. "Who do you think you are coming in here giving orders? This isn't your house," she retorted. "I grew up here," I shot back, "and you're just a guest." That was when she laughed, a harsh, triumphant laugh that made my skin crawl. "Oh, honey, you've got it all wrong. This house belongs to Tommy now. Your mother signed everything. Over to him. There's a will and everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom?" I asked in a voice that sounded strange even to my own ears. "Did you really make a will leaving everything to Tommy?" Mom wouldn't meet my eyes at first, fiddling with some papers in front of her. Then, something seemed to harden in her expression. "Yes," she said flatly. "It's true." The words came out barely above a whisper. "I'm the one helping you. I'm the one sending money every month. Tommy doesn't work. He doesn't contribute anything. Don't you dare talk about your brother that way." Mom's voice rose sharply. "You don't understand him. You never understood him at all. He's a parasite, perfectly content to live off my money while his girlfriend trashes our home." I tried to protest. "Oh, stop being so dramatic." But then Mom's tone shifted, revealing a truth I had long feared. "You want to know the truth?" she asked coldly. "I never loved you the way I love Tommy. He's better than you in every way that matters, and I don't want to see you here anymore." Her words hit me like physical blows. All those years of hoping, making excuses, and desperately trying to earn my mother's love came crashing down in that moment, with the quiet click of a door closing behind me. The drive home from Mom's house was a blur. I barely remember the 4-hour trip, the climb up the stairs to my apartment, or even sitting down on my couch that evening. What remains vivid, however, is the moment of clarity that came as I stared at my phone's banking app. There, I saw the automatic transfer of $1,500 that I had set up each month to help Mom, and with a heavy heart, I decisively canceled it for the next several months. In that moment, I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the sudden gap in my budget that now felt less like a burden and more like an opportunity. I began researching investment options for the money I had been sending home, determined to start saving for a real house of my own, a house that would finally belong to me. Then, exactly 1 month after my last visit home, Mom called. The pie. Money didn't come through, she said flatly, with no preamble. No hello, no, how are you? There's no mistake with the bank, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice had become. There was a long moment of stunned silence before she exploded on the line. You, how dare you? She shouted. After everything I've done for you, after everything you've done for me? I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Everything you've done for me? Like forcing me to be Tommy's maid or constantly forgetting about me? Mom's voice, laced with that familiar defense of Tommy, insisted, You know I was upset, but you can't just stop helping us. We're counting on that money. Tommy and Candy are even planning a vacation to Cancun. They need a break. I interrupted sharply. Tommy doesn't need a vacation, Mom. He needs a job. How dare you speak about your own son that way? You're just jealous because you left everything to him. Fine, she spat. You made your choice and now he can take care of you. The rest of her tirade dissolved into a stream of accusations and demands. I let her rant for a moment before speaking again. "Goodbye, Mom. Don't call me again." I blocked her number before she could reply. But Mom wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, messages started pouring in through every possible channel. Facebook messages about how she was struggling to pay the bills, Instagram comments decrying me as a terrible daughter, and emails detailing all the sacrifices she had made for me, many of which I couldn't even recall happening. Tommy joined in too, sending aggressive texts claiming that I was destroying the family and that Mom was crying because of me. "You better start sending money again, or else I'll block you too," he wrote. One message even read, "Try getting a job, Candy," along with a lengthy LinkedIn message from Candy herself, pleading that I was breaking my poor mother's heart and that Tommy was too sensitive to handle the stress of work right now. I couldn't help but admire her creativity, though I knew deep down that I was done trying to meet their expectations. It has now been 6 months since that final break. I don't know how Mom and Tommy are really doing, and for the first time in my life, I no longer feel guilty about my decision. Maybe they've finally realized that Tommy needs to support himself. Maybe they're still waiting for me to cave in and start sending money again. Or perhaps they have found someone else to manipulate. The truth is, I no longer need to concern myself with their problems. The $1,500 I once sent every month has instead been channeled into a down payment fund for my very own house. A real house, not just a small apartment. I know I sleep better at night now, no longer awakened by angry messages or guilt-tripping phone calls. In those quiet nights, I find solace in the thought that Richard would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself. One day, as I drove past a construction site bearing a "Now Hiring" sign, I almost stopped to take a picture to send to Tommy. But then I just smiled and kept driving. Their problems aren't my problems anymore, and I have finally learned to let go. After all these years of trying to earn a mother's love and living in the shadow of a family divided by grief and favoritism, I feel free. In the aftermath of all the loss, pain, and endless sacrifices, I began to piece together a new life. I reflected on the many moments of my childhood, the laughter over pancake mornings, the silence after Dad's untimely death, and the growing resentment as Mom's attention shifted entirely to Tommy. I remembered Richard's kind eyes and the way he always tried to be there for me when I needed guidance. I recalled the bittersweet farewell at my graduation and the mix of joy and sorrow that came with finally stepping out into the world on my own terms. Each memory, painful as it was, contributed to the person I have become today, a person who knows what it means to struggle, who understands the true cost of neglect, and who cherishes the value of self-respect. There were moments when I almost wished I could go back in time, to relive those early years and perhaps change the course of our lives. I imagined a world where Dad was still here to see the pancake masterpieces he so lovingly created, where Mom's laughter was not so overshadowed by her fixation on Tommy, and where I wasn't constantly feeling like the forgotten one. But life, as it always does, marched on. I learned that time heals wounds, even if the scars remain as silent reminders of the past. I learned to find strength in the smallest victories, a kind word from a friend, a successful project at work, or even the simple act of taking a deep breath in the quiet of the night. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life brick by brick. I invested not only in my future, but also in my own happiness. I made new friends, explored new hobbies, and discovered that life held beauty even in the midst of chaos. I began to understand that while I could not change what had happened in the past, I could shape my own future. I set goals for myself, goals that went beyond merely surviving. I dreamed of a life filled with genuine connections, free from the heavy burden of guilt and resentment that had weighed me down for so many years. As the seasons changed, so did I. I moved into my new home and started to decorate it with pieces that reflected the person I had become. I filled the space with light and color, creating a haven that was all my own, a stark contrast to the cold, shadowy memories of my childhood home. I often sat by the window, gazing out at the world and allowing myself to dream. Dreams of a family that was whole, of relationships built on mutual respect and love, began to take shape in my mind. I realized that I deserved a life where I was valued for who I was, not just as an afterthought or a backup plan. I also began to invest in my career with a renewed sense of determination. Every project I completed, every challenge I overcame, reminded me that I was capable of so much more than I had ever imagined. The pain of the past gradually transformed into a driving force, a reminder that I could and would create a future that was entirely my own. With each passing day, I grew more confident, more independent, and more determined to build a life that was free of the shadows of my family's history. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often found myself thinking about Richard and all that he had done for me. His gentle guidance, his unwavering support. Those memories became a beacon of hope during even the darkest times. I promised myself that I would honor his memory by living a life of integrity and self-respect, a life where I never allowed anyone to take advantage of my kindness again. Looking back now, I see that the journey I have taken is not just a story of loss and pain, but also one of growth, resilience, and ultimately, freedom. I have learned that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that free us from the chains of our past. I have learned that it is possible to let go of old hurts and build something beautiful in their place. And most importantly, I have learned that I am worth so much more than the sum of my family's disappointments. As I sit here in the quiet of my new home, I can almost hear the echoes of my childhood, those bittersweet memories that once filled every corner of my heart. But now, those echoes are joined by new sounds, the laughter of friends, the hum of a life well lived, and the soft murmur of hope that speaks of a future filled with promise. I have learned to cherish every moment, to celebrate every small victory, and to forgive not only those who have hurt me, but also myself for the years lost in longing for a love that was never truly mine. I know that there will be challenges ahead. Life rarely unfolds exactly as we plan, and the scars of the past may never fully disappear. Yet, I also know that I have the strength to face whatever comes my way. I have built a foundation on the lessons learned from a childhood marked by loss, neglect, and the bitter taste of favoritism. And now, with each day that passes, I am writing a new chapter. A chapter of independence, of self-worth, and of finally claiming the life I deserve. The journey from that quiet, painful morning, so many years ago, to the vibrant, determined person I am today has not been easy. It has been a road filled with heartache, misunderstandings, and moments of deep solitude. But it has also been a road of self-discovery, a journey that has taught me the true meaning of resilience. I have come to understand that sometimes we must walk away from the past in order to step into a future that is bright with possibility. I have learned to find beauty in the everyday moments, and in doing so, I have finally found the freedom to be who I truly am. Now, as I look forward to each new day, I do so with a quiet confidence. I know that my past will always be a part of me, but it no longer defines me. I have reclaimed my voice, my dreams, and my future. I have built a life that, while imperfect, is filled with hope and the promise of tomorrow. And in that life, I am no longer a forgotten child, nor am I the reluctant savior of a broken family. I am simply me, finally free. Sometimes I still wonder what might have been if that fateful spring morning had turned out differently. But I have come to realize that every twist and turn in our lives, no matter how painful, shapes us into who we are meant to be. My journey has been long and arduous, but it has also been one of growth, liberation, and ultimately, self-love. Today, I wake up with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that I have the strength to overcome any obstacle. In the end, I am grateful for every moment, the good and the bad, that has brought me to this point. I cherish the memories of a father who loved me dearly, the support of a kind man who stepped in when I needed it most, and even the painful lessons learned from a mother whose love came with a price. Each of these experiences has taught me that love, in its many forms, is never simple or easy. It is messy, complicated, and sometimes painfully imperfect. But it is also the force that drives us to become the best versions of ourselves. And so, as I continue to build my new life, I hold on to the hope that one day, perhaps, the wounds of the past will heal completely, leaving behind only the lessons that have made me stronger. I know now that I deserve a life filled with genuine happiness, a life where I am respected, valued, and loved for who I truly am. I am no longer bound by the expectations or shortcomings of those who came before me. I am free to dream, to love, and to live on my own terms. This is my story, a story of loss, of struggle, and of the slow, steady journey toward freedom. And though the road ahead remains uncertain, I face it with courage and determination, confident that each new day is an opportunity to rewrite my own destiny. Finally, I have learned that sometimes the most powerful act of love is learning to love oneself, even after a lifetime of being overlooked. I am free.